Good evening from Denmark, Europe, and welcome to Metaplanet Roundtable episode 5 today with a cap wearing, beautiful, clever, amazing panel here. Can't wait to go through all the topics that we have and have a conversation. So the topics we have listed here as we get started. Q2 was a blowout BTC yield result of 129.4% and acceleration from Q1. Climb for sure has some ideas about where this acceleration is going. I'm pretty sure Brian is also cooking on those numbers. There was a beautiful shout out from Dylan Leclerc to Climb. We're going to have a look at that graph. That was awesome. Good to see that connection with the shareholder community. Climb obviously has some graphs, some numbers he's crunched to get us excited. That's going to be awesome. We're going to talk about the preferreds that we are excited about coming up in Japan for Metaplanet, potentially US. We'll see. We'll see. We'll find out, and the total addressable markets for that. Anyways, Khristina, Climb, Brian, Blake, so good to see you guys. Thank you for being here. How are you guys doing?
We're great. I'm great.
Yeah.
I feel very good. Fantastic. Here with my hat on.
Yeah, it happened last 3 minutes before 8 p.m. Central European here. The hats just started coming 1, 2, 3, 4, and then 4 hats, and we just need Climb to get his hat on his avatar there, and then we can do this every Tuesday. It's Tuesday still, right? Yeah. What about you, Climb? You've been crunching some numbers?
Yeah, a little bit. I mean, Metaplanet's keeping me busy. So, you know, I mean, there's often the Monday purchase, and we always have to guess which memorable number they'll land on. So,
what's your thoughts for next time? We're now at 13350.
I don't know if it would be like 15,000 or, you know, 15555 or what. Maybe
they might skip the 4 range entirely.
Someone
people
said
don't know.
Four and Brian, go ahead.
Yeah, I was gonna say, if people don't know, 4 in Japanese numerology means death because the word for 4 sounds like the word for death. So yeah, the 444 memes don't cross over as well to Japanese culture. So maybe we just see them go straight to 1555, and maybe need another 5 on there.
Why not? But that's the beautiful part of having you here on the show, Brian, because you lived in Japan, you understand the Japanese culture, and every single time you have some local insights that are just awesome to have. Actually, before we progress, let me say that that Metaplanet right now has 13,350 Bitcoin on the balance sheet. The MNAV, according to the website, is 5.22. That gives a market cap of Metaplanet on roughly 70,000 basically Bitcoin, 70,000 Bitcoin for a company that has stated that they will accumulate 210, and that's lowballing for sure. As usual, they'll blow that out. I expect they'll collect at least 420,000 Bitcoin on their balance sheet, likely more. And the end game, when fiat is dead, the yen is dead, the dollar is dead, etc., they will have a value, I believe, on the stock market, both of the, let's say, 420,000 Bitcoin, if that's what they accumulate, plus the value of the business they can generate out of that balance sheet, running a bank or whatever it may be. So quick tablecloth math for me, I think it's realistic that Metaplanet eventually will be worth 1 million Bitcoin in market cap, which is where strategy is right now. So 70,000 Bitcoin price for Metaplanet, I think, is very attractive. What are you guys' thoughts on that, if any?
Climb, do you want to start?
I mean, someone else should probably go ahead. It's
well,
with the. Yeah, go ahead.
You can go ahead if you want to, but I'll jump in if you'd rather someone else start.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, one thing I always like to emphasize with any kind of numbers around this is that it's so path dependent. The error bars are so wide that when you're trying to pin it down to a single number on a single date, it's not going to be right. There's going to be quite wide degree of variance. Given that said, the numbers they put out, they've done a very good job of under promising and over delivering. Do I think they can do it again? Absolutely. Bull market willing, the numbers could get bumped even higher. And, I take a more of like, see how it goes type of approach to my thinking, continually adjusting things stochastically. But yeah, as long as we keep going how we're going, sure, why not?
Yeah, it does seem like it's something that's in the realm of possibilities, Anders, like in terms of like if the bond market were to break and their equity market, Japan's equity market were to break through Metaplanet, like they could really start to put all that capital into Bitcoin. And it's very interesting. And all these capital pools are like dominoes, and you can make the argument that this domino is about to fall in Japan through Metaplanet. And so obviously, as Brian was saying, that's very hard to model, but it can get very bullish very quick. And it seems to be, I think one of the things that's crazy about Climb's models is that, even he says it's like, these are, I don't say sandbagging numbers, but if the fixed income market starts to come in and some of these other things, it's like, this could go much, much higher, much quicker than we think. So.
And I think when Dylan hosted his spaces going over their 555 plan, he made it very clear that the numbers that they were giving as guidance were conservative. And so the expectation that he's at least set for the market now is that they're going to beat them. Another point I'd make just in terms of market cap is something that Climb and Vin's, addressed this weekend in the Metaplanet Dojo, where they highlighted the fact that Metaplanet can very realistically become one of the largest companies in Japan. You're talking, hundreds of billions of market cap, much smaller than the largest companies here in the US, but still very large. And the largest company in Japan, I think they said was around, call it 300 billion. So we're talking about significant upside.
And another way I like to think about, the yield is as a form of scarcity. So the Bitcoin yield for MicroStrategy and Metaplanet, you can argue that MicroStrategy's shares are 30% more scarce than the fixed supply of Bitcoin, because they're only going to acquire Bitcoin at a faster rate than Bitcoin's growth. I'm not saying that correctly, but I think you kind of understand what I'm saying. Is like there's a way of thinking about that as a scarcity metric. Like they're pulling in the Bitcoin, and their shares could arguably be more scarce in terms of Bitcoin. I know that's kind of weird to say and weird to think through, but it's kind of a way to think through the lens. And I'll just pause there.
Yeah,
Climb,
I think. Yeah, sorry. So I think that they can fairly predictably land between 500,000 and 1 million Bitcoin eventually. That within the next few years, if the world stays ignorant about Bitcoin and lets them and strategy get 1.5 million Bitcoin or something like that a piece, then okay. And the question is, how much share dilution would there be? And they're going to increase their Bitcoin holdings a lot more than their share count. That's what accretive dilution is, and what the current MNAV allows. Any MNAV over 1 technically allows that to some extent, right? The higher, the better. And with preferreds, I'm not saying that they should do this, but as a thought experiment, could they say we're doing the 555 plan, and then after that we'll never issue another common share? Again, I'm not saying that they should do that. It's just an interesting thing to think about. They could literally do that and then just raise everything based on preferreds. There may be some technical reasons, that's not optimal, keeping the ratio. They'll probably want to hit the ATM, so to speak, on their common shares some to manage that. But could they reach 1 billion or 1 million Bitcoin on their balance sheet largely with preferreds? Yes, I think so.
I agree on that, and we're going to talk about prefers specifically, but first I want to just further add to your point, or substantiate it, whatever it's called, Climb, that you say, if the world stays a little bit oblivious to Bitcoin, if Bitcoin doesn't take over tomorrow, but it takes a little bit longer before it reaches hyper-Bitcoinization, $50 million per Bitcoin, because what Metaplanet is showing, unlike currently strategy, which might change in the second half of the year, but what Metaplanet is displaying is an incredible ability to buy more Bitcoin, put more Bitcoin on the balance sheet, more Bitcoin per stock, despite Bitcoin practically being a stable coin. You know what I mean? And so I think, yeah, I think I would support that climb. It's not unlikely they go between half and a full million. And if MNAV2 is the final end game evaluation, that should put them at a $2 million market cap of not $2 million, 2 million Bitcoin market cap. So yeah, I totally agree on that climb. Do you guys have anything more to this evaluation of saying that it's $70,000? Why do I keep saying dollars? 70,000 Bitcoin market cap. Anders, get it through your head. Otherwise, I want to go ahead and talk about the blowout Q2, which I think we all is. So, okay, if you guys are good with that, let me just share screen here. Let's find the yield. It's right there. And it comes right here. So if we're looking over on the left side, where we can see there's 4 graphs or 4 bars, and it says 348.8% year to date BTC yield. For those who don't know it, BTC yield is the increase in yield, increase in Bitcoin per share. So that's the key number. It's more important than how many Bitcoin does a company have, because you have to take into account also how many shares did they have to create to get that extra. And Q4 last year, when the numbers were still very low, and it's easier to get a high growth, a high yield, that was 309%, and Bitcoin moved a lot, and that helps. That also helped strategy a lot in Q4. And then Q1 this year, they did a very respectable, nice 95.6% BTC yield per share, Metaplanet. And then in Q2, we saw acceleration, and we just ended that, and the yield ended at 129.4% extra Bitcoin per share. They keep talking about acceleration climb. I have been looking forward to this show and hearing your opinion and your number crunching here on the acceleration and what's going on. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, so Q2 blowing Q1 out of the water wasn't a surprise to those of us who were looking at the numbers very closely. It kind of looked like it would be neck and neck unless you really properly weighted the more recent growth. So before February, like I don't even know if they bought any Bitcoin between Jan 1 and February 17th. I'd have to double check that. But I don't think that they did, because they were kind of in a pause trying to figure out like a larger plan. And then they started that really, the 210 million plan in February 17th. It went live. And then now we have the 555 plan. So the gaps between plans do actually slow down. They handicap the growth, which I think is a large reason why they went with a larger plan this time. So, it'll last longer than 60 trading days, basically. But they've managed to still have this extremely clean growth, even with these gaps in purchases, which haven't been very long generally. It's incredible that even with as sporadic as their buying might look, if you just looked at the purchase dates, over the last 14 months, they've bought Bitcoin maybe 40 times. But if you chart it out, if you chart it out, it's going to stay in the bands very, very cleanly. And nobody else does this. It's incredible. And it's really incredible thinking about MNAV roller coastering up and down. MNAV has not been static, and you might think that would be the way that you would achieve these sorts of results they've achieved, this sort of perfect, clean, exponential growth, but that hasn't been the case at all. They have managed to make it work with MNAV all over the place, generally, between like 3 and 10, let's say.
Yeah, and right now, actually, so You just said something that wanted me to put the website back on. And for anyone interested, this is Metaplanet's own website. It's metaplanet.jp. And here also you can find the MNAV. And so it's a little bit tricky because on different websites you find different MNAVs for these different companies. So like which one is up to date, which one is diluted shares as it should be. It's more correct and conservative, etc. But I guess if anything, we have to go with the company's own website. What do you guys think?
I would agree.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's why I like when companies publish their own numbers, because, you know, I saw this problem all the time when I was trying to put together data for a strategy before they had their own dashboard, that once you start pulling from different sources, nothing matches up, and you get these little rounding errors everywhere that totally drive you nuts if you're a little bit OCD.
Yeah, and we all are, and that's why we're here, right? I don't know, but Brian, what is your thoughts on this increased yield in Q2? There seems to be this acceleration. Do you agree with Climb that it's a good having bigger capital plans so they don't have to waste time in between, or like what do you see going on?
Yeah, I think that's important. You know, also in Q1, prices were depressed a little bit, which probably didn't help so much. But then largely due to the influence of a certain member on the call here today, I think volumes increased quite a bit. And also, the other thing you have to think about, just as they scale, the plans necessarily must be larger because you're issuing more shares against a larger base. To minimize the, if I were them, to minimize the downtime, I would always be issuing the biggest possible plan that I could within, the regulatorily allowable framework. So that way you've always got as much room to run without, having to face the downtime.
Yeah, right. So someone wrote in the chat, I'm just going to try and check this out. Someone wrote, Marvin, Simon just posted something, maybe a hint that he's watching this podcast. I don't know, but as you're talking, I'm looking at Simon's feed right now and see if he wrote anything. But yeah, totally makes sense. Brian, why not just max it out? And if Simon is watching, why don't you just make the next plan 10 trillion and let's not have any stops in between, right? That's silly. Khristina.
I was going to say there is a limit to the amount of shares that they have left in the current plan. And over the weekend, Climb and Vince were just talking about the September shareholder meeting, where the expectation is, or the guess is that they will increase the share count to the max allowable increase, as well as potentially vote on preferreds.
Yeah, one thing that I think many of us know, but maybe not everyone knows quite yet, is that in Japan, I believe the limit is like 4 times your current shares outstanding is the limit for how much you can increase your cap. And then also the difference that if you do a share split, the authorized shares automatically scales with that, so you don't have to do a special increase just for a share split like you do in the States. So a couple unique things there to always keep in mind.
Interesting. What about you, Blake? What's your thoughts on Q2 being significantly faster than Q1? And I want to add to this whole conversation that this is by far the fastest highest BTC yield of any of the companies that existed 3 months ago, because that's what we're talking about, like SWC, H100. They're fresh. They're 2 months old. So amazing quarter. But Blake, what's your thoughts on this faster, bigger yield than Q1?
Yeah, I'm just trying to understand where we are in the S-curve adoption and how like Metaplanet might be bringing this hyper Bitcoinization or this S-curve adoption forward through the equity and debt markets. And that totally makes sense that it's going to scale because it's an S-curve of a technology adoption. So that's a huge thing to think about. But I think, it makes sense that we're going to see an acceleration. And then additionally, that I think it just keeps proving how desperate, I guess, is the capital markets, equity markets are to get get some Bitcoin yields or get some Bitcoin returns. And they're doing that through Metaplanet. So that's growing instead of slowing down, which gets me even more bullish for the preferreds. So, which will be infinitely more torque and also increase the share price drastically, because they're not going to have to issue any equity potentially to do that. Going back to Climb's kind of thought process there, the kind of game theory, they could not issue any more equity, and their share price would go parabolic, and they'd be the most valuable company pretty quickly in Japan, just based off of that kind of game theory.
It could be interesting to see what that could do to the shorts, if that could triggers into a bit of a short squeeze. I guess they have all these options, and they have to play the piano in Japan to maximize shareholder value. And that game room, war room must be fun there. Before we move on, to the preferreds, because we all want to talk about preferreds in September voting. But this shout out that Dylan gave to climb that ladder. Let's take a look here. So Dylan, he tweeted this out, this graph where, let me just also put it on screen. There you go. There you go. There we have it. Let me make sure that, there we go. So Dylan tweeted this out, Dylan Leclerc, where, it's the whole environment of Metaplanet with the orange color and the rocket and the astronauts, but this astronaut is climbing that ladder. A beautiful shout out to you, Climb. How did that make you feel when you saw that?
I appreciate, I don't like much attention, and I always take compliments in sort of an awkward way. I don't really know how to take things. But obviously I appreciate this, and it's I'm just glad to be part of the movement. And to some degree, maybe I sort of lit the match in the US, but I think that something like this would have been pretty inevitable. It's just a matter of speeding it up. Us talking about Metaplanet and making a case for it, getting investors interested. So if nobody knew about Metaplanet, if no US investor, there's just a wall and nobody knew that Metaplanet existed, obviously there would be no money that would go there from the US. And in that case, the share price would certainly be lower. There's no question. So the US, this is just my total estimate. I would guess that the US investors have probably gobbled up 50 to 100 million shares over the last 2 months. I think that's pretty reasonable. Just with, there's quite a few people that I know that hold 1 million or more shares. There's quite a few people that I know that hold 100,000. There's tons of people I know that hold 100,000 shares. There's no way it could be under 10 or 20 million shares that sort of the US has gobbled up in the last 2 months. It's got to be 50 and maybe even 100 million shares. But yeah, wow. I like Mike's artwork that Dylan reposted there, and I appreciate the nod.
Oh, it's Mike's artwork. I didn't know that, but yeah, awesome. And, but I get it. You may not, but you appreciate the gesture. Let me say that. Khristina, how cool is this?
I think it's very cool, and I think Mike's artwork is very cool, and I've kind of been pushing him on the side to try to put some of his artwork on graphic tees. I know that Metaplanet doesn't have an official merchandise store yet, but if he made something unofficial with hotel investor, I think there'd be a lot of demand for it.
I totally agree. I gotta talk with Mike. I've been thinking for weeks that I need to start using thumbnails, and it can just be a cool design, and then I can change, the topic and the episode 4, episode 5, etc. Every time. But I guess I should speak to Mike. Brian, pretty cool shout out here to Climb, huh? With this. This graphic.
Absolutely. I've always said one of my barometers of the health of an investor base is the quality of the fan art that comes out of it. And I've got to say, Metaplanet is leading on that front by far. Something else, there's been more ladder iconography. If you noticed in some of Dylan and Simon's posts, they've used the little ladder emoji. I also noticed some other Bitcoin treasuring companies using the ladder emoji in their posts. I'm going to need a ruling on that. I'm not sure if that's allowed.
Copyright
but,
issue.
But I do think it speaks to the overall Metaplanet community and shareholder community that's come together between like Mike's art and a lot of people in the dojo, the tools that they've helped create, whether it be being able to track, the stock price over the different markets and do the quick currency conversion. Last night, I was listening to the live stream during the trading hours and learned for the first time that Bork from the dojo has actually created something on TradingView where you can see real-time Metaplanet's moving strike warrant strike prices by day and average. And so if anyone wants to kind of check that tool out, that's a new tool and a new feature that I just learned about last night. And again, it's just from the Metaplanet, kind of shareholder community putting these things together for everyone to leverage.
Gotcha. And Blake, thoughts on Dylan giving a shout out here to Climb that no doubt lit the match in the U.S. market.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's great artwork and I love to see it. And I love to see kind of the community coming together. I know that it's already there and in the dojo and whatnot, but like other people reposting these type of things and that kind of viral aspect coming together. So I'd say more and more established people, I guess is one way to say it, or, like a Michael Saylor reposting it. Those are all just great things and shows that the growth of mindshare is increasing, which is great. But as Klein was mentioning, it was interesting about his data about how many people, let's say in the United States, are investing in Metaplanet. I'd be curious to see how many investors are global versus Japanese to get an understanding of the demand there. Because part of me is trying to understand how many people are jumping on the Metaplanet train because it's the best performing horse right now. At least, I mean, that's how I feel. Obviously, there's other ones that have a higher yield, but I feel like this is going to have the highest yield for the foreseeable future. Versus people in Japan that are just using it because it's their best Bitcoin proxy, almost like an ETF, if that makes sense. So it'd be interesting to think through that. I don't know if anyone's got any opinions on that, because there is a little bit of game theory reflexivity where you're like, okay, cool, this is the best performing yield, therefore we're all going to, be a part of the best performing asset. And so, I'm trying to think through what that would mean. Obviously, it's kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy, but that'd be data into that. So I don't know if anyone has any thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think that's a great topic, Blake. Let's take it around the room here. Why don't we start with you, Brian, if you have any comments on that, thoughts on that, because I think that's super interesting is how this plays out and where investor funds are going to flow, because that's going to push the MNAP. That's going to make them able to generate more yield. So how is the game theory? Brian, any thoughts?
Yeah, well, that's basically textbook reflexivity, is that buying begets more buying. So yeah, obviously you need the performance to get the fan base, and the fan base itself drives the performance and get the flywheel going. So yeah, I think there's more to it than just that. It helps to have one of the largest capital markets in the world with fairly homogeneous investor base within that market. It's not a place like Europe that's a little bit more siloed in terms of the different pools of capital. I mean, they still got the European Union over there, but it's not quite the same, where you've just got like one bucket of regulatory infrastructure on top of one market where everyone's getting excited about the same thing at the same time. And I think that's one thing that even though we're here sitting in the United States and in other parts of the world excited about it, one thing that's kind of woke me up to the power of these international companies. It's actually an experience in Korea, but I think it's true in other parts of the world, including Japan. I had this experience. So I was in Korea during the 2002 World Cup. And one day I woke up like the entire country was wearing red T-shirts. I was like, what's going on? It's the World Cup, don't you know? So, I think people, you just don't see this kind of like national excitement around one thing at the same time in the United States the way you see it in other countries. Like, people are proud to be Americans, but I can't remember seeing anything like that ever here. And that type of phenomenon, I think, is very much what's going on in Japan right now around Metaplanet. And so the fact that it's a large market behind it is very obviously very beneficial.
I'm curious with what you just said. So I'm not aware of to which extent Metaplanet is now a household name in Japan. Is that what you were saying is happening, or?
I don't necessarily know that it's a household name. I just think that in general, I'm not sure what word to use to call it, but it's just that people can kind of all rally behind the same thing over there in a much easier way than happens here. And it's not necessarily to the extent that everyone in Japan knows about it as a household. Maybe everyone in Japan does. I haven't been to Japan for a little while, so but just that type of phenomenon exists, and it seems to me that Metaplanet is very well situated to tap into that. If that makes sense.
And it's also interesting to think about how hyper Bitcoinization happens in terms of, Bitcoin has been the best performing asset. And you think you just say that and people would jump on board and you make the logical business case and talk about all the dynamics and asymmetry and things like that. And people are like, oh, that logically makes sense. I'm going to jump on board. But unfortunately, we're herd animals. And that I think that's a benefit to Japan. I hate to say that because they all relate to each other. They're all in the same kind of news cycle and feel related in a sense of community. And so that's not how the human beings operate, right? Like we're not staggering into Bitcoin in a very up and to the right at 10% a year. It's these 4-year cycles where it goes to 100,000 then drops to 20 and has these type of things. And I think that's how I see hyper Bitcoinization happening when the FOMO really takes over. And you can make, again, a case that it's going to happen in Japan for this particular dynamic in general, where they've got that community. And now it's like, wait, you're not investing in a Bitcoin treasury company. You're not investing in Metaplanet. And it starts to flip from like, you're the silly one that invests in Bitcoin to like, how are you not doing that? And, we might be seeing that right now. And of course, Brian, being in Japan, can probably articulate that or understand that a little bit better than I am. But that's kind of how I think about it. And that's how I think hyper Bitcoinization is going to start to happen, is when when we get the percentage of the herd mentality to start to run away from their typical investments into Metaplanet or Bitcoin.
Maybe just to add on there, I kind of see these Bitcoin treasury companies, the investor base is developing something like sports teams. You've got like fans of your favorite Bitcoin treasury company team, and I think that's part of what we're seeing happening more broadly.
I just want to attest to me being from Denmark, and right now I'm here, and 6 million people with a unique language, unique culture. Of course, there's some similarities to the other Scandinavian countries and Germany and England, etc. But when you have that, you have something together as a national culture. So I could see, obviously Japan, it's an island, many islands. It's the own language, the whole own culture. So something being very successful in Japan can be picked up by the whole culture, and it's a giant economy on the world scene. And right now they are one. And by the way, if we're looking at the setup for a Bitcoin accumulating company, it's pretty near perfect in terms of like everything is just like, you couldn't wish for better in this situation. In terms of tax advantages, no ETF, and all of these things. And Khristina, so Blake actually asked a question earlier or brought something up. I don't know if you want to comment on that or something else here in terms of how do we see it playing out with these different backs competing across the world. But maybe it's actually something we should take up in an episode of Bitcoin Treasuries World instead of the Metaplanet. But to the extent that it's interesting here or relevant for Metaplanet, if you have anything you want to add or to the culture.
I don't think I was following the question.
I don't blame you, Khristina.
Like, you remember what the question you had was?
Well, so Blake.
that Japan is unique in that I can, or maybe Brian was speaking to it, where a culture can really get behind something and create a movement, more so in a country like Japan or Korea versus the United States, which is so culturally diverse. It's hard to really create like one cultural movement. I certainly agree with that statement, but I don't know if that's the question you were referring to or thought that Blake brought up.
So I think Blake initially talked about that you have different MNAVs in different companies across the world in different markets, and how does the investor dynamic and movement of capital help actually materialize success one place or another? And then we spoke also about a culture. So there was a couple of things in there. So I loved your answer.
I do think it matters. And I saw someone post a comment in the chat basically saying that they were there with Smarter Web Company because of where they were located. And I do think that you're going to see, countries get behind their Bitcoin treasury company, and that there probably will be one dominant one per country. I certainly agree with that statement, even though I think someone could own Smarter Web Company there and also buy Metaplanet, because Metaplanet could be, the best performing one globally.
Yep.
So you could have a little bit of home country support plus wanting to own the best, which I think will be Metaplanet.
And you and I actually spoke about that Monday last week, which was the first time you on here, where we were talking about how this could play out. But let's move on to you, Climb, if you have any comments or thoughts on this.
Yeah, as a U.S. investor, there's essentially no reason. I mean, obviously, I've found an exception with Metaplanet, but traditionally there is no reason to ever invest in anything outside of the U.S. because if I'm looking for performance, I have it. I mean, the S&P is, let's say 7 to 10% a year typical returns, and that's considered boring. That's considered like that's what the older generation would want to do. That's the hands off. You just let it go, and you become a millionaire if you're a janitor, after 30 years or whatever. Like that's the story there. So performance is not hard to find, and if you want more performance, there's endless different stocks and options and whatever.
So,
am I still here?
Yep, we can hear you. Everyone's
all right. Starlink is that's kind of rough. Sorry.
Oh wait, I thought Starlink was amazing.
The other thing, it should be. I'm not sure if it's because it's sitting on a chair in my lawn, or maybe it's something else. Who knows? I have it aimed pretty well, but it's not nailed down or anything. So we'll see. Maybe it'll get better. The other thing, so performance is easy in the U.S., right? It's not in Japan. Good luck finding a multi-billion-dollar company in Japan that's typically growing at 10 or 15 or 20% a year or beyond that, right? That's why a lot of these bigger companies in Japan, and I don't know a ton about the market there, but a lot of the bigger companies in Japan seem to offer dividends, maybe 3%, maybe 4%, maybe a little higher. And, that's where their profits go. And I don't know that the company's stock price does very well on top of the dividend. It's sort of like the US. If you offer a big dividend, your stock probably isn't doing anything too special. And that's probably why you're trying to attract the yield investors instead of the performance investors. And then in the US, yield is also not hard to come by. We have higher interest rates, first of all. There's tons of things like covered call ETFs that, can give 10% interest yearly, no problem. And then, of course, now we have like strategies, preferred stock and stuff, which is amazing as well. So it's easy to come by. And in Japan, that's not the case. If Japan is looking for performance, Metaplanet's it. If Japan is looking for yield, the Metaplanet preferred. It's interesting because that's people either want performance in Bitcoin per share, essentially with Metaplanet, or you want their future yield products, which I'm starting to think they may actually price considerably higher because it's going to be self-healing. The price is going to regulate to a lower yield anyway. So it almost doesn't matter. They could come out with a 6% yield day one and just let it reprice, sell into it, let it self-heal like strategy is doing. So I think that they're going to easily dominate the, sort of fixed income market in Japan. And yeah, in the US, player in that market, but it's hard to dominate it because there's just too many options. There's too many good options in the US.
Yeah,
And
agree. Yeah, go ahead, Blake.
yeah, not to interrupt unless you want. I just had some thoughts on that. You know, earlier when you mentioned that like all the things are good for Metaplanet, there's one thing that I wish was better that, you know, Climb is alluding to in the United States to have a bigger preferred market, right? And I'm trying to think through this, like it's so much bigger. My ideal would be that the market in Japan is a lot bigger for the preferred stock, and that Metaplanet can just come in and say, oh, you're only doing 1 or 2%, we'll do 5 and just take all that market share, right? That'd be the ideal scenario. But additionally, like I think it might be small because of the Japanese yield carry trade, where all that money is being put into other markets, the United States and other these yielding products. So they don't have a lot of that in Japan, and they don't have the ability to have a high yielding product. These companies have the ability, the Japanese companies have the ability to have a high yielding product. So I just kind of throwing that out. There's not like it's just something to think through. And I think because of the yield carry trade, that might be an indication of potential demand to take for Metaplanet in terms of preferred stock. So just throw that out.
So do you guys want to get into all the preferred stocks now, that talk, or should we look at Climb's graphs first? I kind of have that down as a point, but we can. What do you guys prefer? Should we just jump? Let's jump. Let's keep that further preferred because it's something to look forward to. Except all of it is. But so let's have a look at the Climb shared 3 different graphs here. Graphs before we got started. So Climb, if you want to take it away here and put some words on.
Yeah, cool. So, you know, as I kind of mentioned earlier, before the 210 million plan, their accumulation was like, there's a good way to put it, and I'm trying to think of like what the best way would be to say it, but it was kind of all over the place. It's amazing that it ended up as clean a result as they got, because, you know, there were delays between different like rights issuance or whatever. And maybe they just, you know, obviously they managed it extremely well, but maybe it just all fit into their plan, and it's not the way I'm thinking with sort of the gaps between things. But I can't help but see that there were gaps between things that that weren't ideal, and they still ended up with these really ideal outcomes. So looking at the like the amount of Bitcoin they had before the 210 million plan went live February 17th. So here, this graph starts at February 16th and it ends yesterday, I guess, or the day before, whatever. Anyway, so I checked this out, I think last night, that the Bitcoin doubling rate, so how long does it take them to go from 2,000 Bitcoin to 4,000 Bitcoin, you know, from 5,000 to 10,000, whatever. The average doubling rate is under 46 days. I expected it to be a little bit under 60. I would have, if the math came back and showed me that it was 57 or 58 days, I would have been like, oh yeah, sure, I guess that fits in, that makes sense. I didn't expect to see 46 days, and I've been looking at this stuff nonstop for 2 months. So this, you know, 2 things there. One, it describes how hard it is for humans to think in exponential terms. It's very much not natural. If you know, if a lion is running at you, you extrapolate, you know, the trajectory that it's running, you anticipate the intercept, and you try to figure out a rock that you can hide behind or something before that intercept. So humans think very linearly. We expect things to just, you know, an object in motion stays in motion. Exponentially. Exponentially means every single day they're growing faster, not on a percentage base, of course, but, you know, on a net base. So under 46 days is insane, and the word accelerate has been thrown out. Dylan said it, you know, and I've repeated it as well. And if you consider that this graph here has this insane growth, and then you look at the, let's see, between May 19th and June 24th was between those plans, and they only did like 1 buy there. I guess it's kind of hard to see the dates there, but you can see that it sort of flattened out there, and they used bonds to sort of pull the future forward and stuff, and they've paid those off and reissued new bonds now. But even with that gap, everything just kept growing at the same rate. It's beautiful. Like, their execution, I can't believe, with MNAV all over the place and with these awkward gaps between plans and stuff, that they're able to keep things this clean. And then look at how strong the growth is. So the growth during the plan, I would expect, at least while we're at these lower numbers, still only having 13,000 some odd Bitcoin, I would expect us to actually speed up. And you can kind of see that on the right side of that chart, that we started slightly below the trend line, let's say a week and a half ago or so, and then now, so far it's looking really good. So obviously we'll see, but I would expect us to keep at this pace for some time. Obviously not forever. Like Dylan says, there's only 21 million Bitcoin. They're going to slow down at some point. But I do expect them personally to accelerate before they slow down. And that's what I'm here for. That's what I'm really watching for. And I get excited with every single purchase. When they're buying 1,000 Bitcoin at a time and they already have over 10,000, it might not feel like a whole lot to people. People want 5,000 Bitcoin in a day or something, but like, just zoom out and look at these graphs. It's amazingly fast. And, not to crap on their competition, but like the reason I didn't get in the blockchain group, AltBG, recently, and I thought about it, but the reason that I stayed away was because I wasn't sure how it'd scale. I didn't fully understand the concept of the Bitcoin bonds arbitrage. Something didn't feel right to me, so I stayed away. But I also wasn't sure if it would scale much, or how at what Bitcoin holdings would it start to slow down. And I don't know if it's fair for me to say that it slowed down, but it appears to, seeing, as you pointed out, I think in the last episode, and certainly now that Q2 is behind us, you can really see how strong Metaplanet's growth is compared to even some of the smaller companies, certainly everything that's bigger, but even compared to some of the smaller ones that now have a substantial amount of Bitcoin, close to 2,000 Bitcoin or whatever.
Yeah, well, the facts speak for themselves, and Blockchain Group had a BTC yield in the ballpark of, I think, 65% in Q2, and Metaplanet had 129.4%. So it's a ballpark around twice the yield. And if you can continue that 2 quarters, 3 quarters compound interest, then the difference becomes a lot. And I think Khristina and I spoke about that also last Monday. I think it was before or after the show, and I think we both exited. Nothing, no disrespect or anything, but we both closed our Blockchain Group position there, just because we think that right now this is moving at a faster pace. And I want to just also again say, you can't compare this to a company that started 2 months ago or 1 month ago. When you start off with a half or 4 Bitcoin or something like that, you're going to have a higher yield. So I think part of what draws you to Metaplanet is Climb is you're looking at this execution, this track record, the line, and how it seems to be accelerating and not slowing down, and just seeing. And then it's in Japan, it's a giant economy. All of these things are playing out very beautifully for Metaplanet. That being said, nobody knows what happens next quarter, and none of this is financial advice. At the best, it's financial entertainment. If you like the entertainment, feel free to hit that like button and subscribe. But Khristina, what are your thoughts here on this graph and the comments from Climb?
No, I mean, I appreciate all of Climb's graphs and work so much, and he puts so much into the community. Him and Vince did another great Metaplanet dojo this past Sunday, and I thought I was going to be on a plane and miss it, but I've never been so thankful for a 2-hour tarmac weather delay. Actually got to tune in, and it made the entire delay quite enjoyable. I love this chart, and going back to the episode that you and I did, a week ago Monday, I think you said, we were, doing a little bit of a comparison between different companies. And at the end of the day, for me, I don't have time, on a daily basis to kind of cross-analyze multiple companies. And just that one conversation, even though my position in the other company was very small, I always just come back to Metaplanet, whether it be because of their clean exponential growth, my confidence in the management team, the strategy, the execution, the community, the available analytics, not only from the company, but from people in the community, such as Climb. It just makes it very difficult to own anything else with conviction.
Absolutely. And Metaplanet for me also is the largest single position in my my portfolio. Brian, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, my thought process is a little bit different. I do spend all day, every day looking at what all the different companies are doing. So,
Me too.
The interesting thing about a graph like this, I think, is what gives rise to that. What type of activity gives rise to this clean exponential chart? And I think maybe Climb would be interested in what your take is on it. But basically, they've done one thing the whole time. They've done these moving strike warrants. Their version of the ATM, and if you grow your shares at something close to a fixed percent, if you're able to dilute 10% continuously over time, I'm not saying that's the exact number, but just for example, that gives you exponential growth. That's what exponential growth is, by growing proportionately to the size that you are continuously over time. That's what it means to grow exponentially. And I think the fact that they've really just had one strategy from start to finish, they've used the bonds to bridge the gaps between plans, more or less, to smooth out those in-between parts. But that's really what's going on here. And I think when you try to compare that with different companies, you haven't necessarily seen the same strategy deployed continuously over time for a long period of time. So, if you're in a situation where, okay, we're doing a private placement this week, we're going to do some convertible bonds this week, and the next week, I don't know what, but we've got all these different strategies we're doing, then you're going to get a growth chart that looks a little bit different because the pattern of the growth is not going to be the same. And so that is how I view this. And I think that, I do own other Bitcoin treasury companies, the other ones that I like. Just in terms of analyzing the overall strategy, though, I think even though at a high level it may look like what Metaplanet is doing is very complex, at a low level I think it's actually very simple. It's one of the simplest things to understand, and so that's definitely an appealing part of it.
Yeah. All right. Thank you, Brian. And I'm in the same boat as you. I'm looking at this all day, and I already told Khristina, also thank you that I want to do a show focused on the overall picture of how the different current winners look like, and how we see this play out, where we go up in the helicopter and look around. So let's talk more about that. And Blake, your thoughts here?
Yeah, I think that's what Brian mentioned is what is driving the yield. I think a lot of people don't want to empirically look at what is actually the differentiator with Metaplanet and MicroStrategy and all these different companies. What's actually the forward things that are going to continue to build or to bring in that capital, right? What are those? Why is that? No one seems to be talking about that, honestly. I find it very strange that we continue to talk about some of these metrics, which are great, the MNAV and whatnot, as opposed to why is the MNAV? Why is there a premium at all? Why are people getting into this? And I think that's where the $1 billion, multi-trillion-dollar question lies, and starts to have the path dependence. And then I think Khristina mentioned being confident with Metaplanet. That's what, looking at those dynamics, it gives me confidence that Metaplanet can execute on that. I think they've got a great management team, but honestly, I feel like any one of us could jump on the management team, become the CEO, and leverage these tools, right? Of course, we're going to leverage different kind of thought leaders and management experts and consulting and investment banks. But I think that's the difference, is that kind of demand that Japan has. And then additionally, as I'm comparing these other Bitcoin treasury companies, I'm trying to understand what tools are available to them and what tools we're trying to get to. So some of these newer companies are using Bitcoin denominated convertible bonds. And as Klein was alluding to earlier, it seems a little off in terms of the value that it could potentially provide. And we can potentially talk about that. It's kind of a nuanced, confusing discussion. So I don't know if it's worth taking this particular call. But, compared to MicroStrategy and Metaplanet that are almost at the preferred market, which is even a more interesting thing to talk about because, I feel like I'm going on a rant now, but the high level overview is like, I think Klein was talking about stack ranking these financial tools, and at the very top is the preferreds because it has the highest torque. And the torque that MicroStrategy talks about doesn't even take into account the share price. So once that has extremely high torque and high value add to the company, it also allows you not to sell any more equity, which means that equity price is just going to go through the roof. And it'd be interesting to math that out a little bit where it's like, okay, if we just stop selling equity, what would happen to the premium on the stock compared to Bitcoin?
I totally want to have this discussion. I think it's the most interesting and most important. So that's a discussion that we definitely should have. But I do want to kind of stick to going through these. I've had three graphs here from Climb. So swinging back up to you, Climb. The next one here of the three, the second of the three, Metaplanet compared to MSTR Bitcoin health ratio. If you have some thoughts there, or you want to just explain what you're seeing and what you're thinking.
Yeah, a lot of people sort of early on, especially late April, early May, you'd get really kind of simple, basic arguments against the Metaplanet thesis. And one of the things like people would just come back with, instead of actually just looking at history, which a lot of these graphs weren't out or whatever before, but they would say, well, Strategy has MNAV, Strategy can, sell shares in the market. How is it possible that Metaplanet could grow faster? And, it's like, okay, well, they started with about 100 Bitcoin, like 97, I think, was like their first purchase. So yeah, they started from a low base. And starting from a low base gives you growth advantages, which obviously we see with a lot of other companies now. Some of them have started with like 10 Bitcoin, and I'm like, wow, like I could go buy 10 Bitcoin right now. Like this company, like people are talking about it like it's going to be the next hype thing, and like half of the people talking about it could just go buy 10 Bitcoin right now. So it's pretty funny, and people just expect that 10 to scale to 100 to 1,000 to 10,000, and it's maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. Metaplanet, the tried and true way is to start with an ATM-like structure, and then to develop something that is much more long-term and that scales much better for a higher market cap stock, which would be preferreds. I would love for them to just skip over the whole convertible bond thing, and I kind of hope that they don't even create any convertible preferreds, to be honest, just because I don't really want to give people who want yield that upside. I think just keeping the people who want some field or some yield in fiat, just give them what they want and don't give them any of the upside of the stock. Keep that for the common shareholders, essentially. Obviously, it gets a lot more like nuanced and complex than that, and I don't understand it to a super high degree, but that's just how I see it. And this just shows, like, even in late April, we were under 1% we had 5,000 Bitcoin, and Strategy had over 500,000 Bitcoin at the time. And now Strategy still has 500 and change. They're almost to 600,000, right? So they've gone like from 500 to 600,000. And Metaplanet's gone from 5,000 Bitcoin to 13,350. It's almost tripled. So there's no way to continue to grow that big. Obviously, if you already hold almost 3% of the total Bitcoin that will ever be mined, not even talking about lost coins or whatever, it's impossible to 10x your Bitcoin holdings or 10x your Bitcoin per share, certainly. Metaplanet right now has a history of over 3 dozen purchases, announced purchases over the last 14 or 15 months, and extremely consistent growth almost no matter what the market is throwing at them, as far as MNAV all over the place and gaps between their plans and stuff. Their execution has been impressive, and people really trust the company. And obviously, they have tons of advantages in the country, and so they're going to have higher torque in Japan on their preferreds than what Strategy has in the U.S. on their preferreds. So it's going to be interesting. And a quick a quick challenge for people is to look at this graph and just ask yourself, where does it level off? Does it hit 10 and then stop climbing, and why? What would cause that? Or does it hit 50% and then stop climbing, and what would cause that? And I don't claim to have the answers. It's just a really good question to ask, and I don't think it stops at 2.5 or 3%. That's certainly a no for me. I don't think it stops at 10%. I don't know if it goes to 25 or 50 or 80, or if it breaks above 100% one day. I'm not ruling out that. I don't think. Please don't misunderstand what I'm saying. I don't think that they'll have more Bitcoin than Strategy, but I'm also not going to rule it out.
Yeah, it's above 0% chance. Khristina.
What would you like me to speak
okay. No, well, the graph.
I was thinking
the graph here where Metaplanet has been able to get a larger percentage compared to MSTR. I mean, their yield and purchase of Bitcoin is fast and faster.
And I don't think I would have anything more to add than Klein himself on this, who created the graphic. But I was kind of thinking in my head what we were talking about with respect to converts, and that just goes back to what I think the quality of the Metaplanet management is. I think, Simon, alluded to a while ago that he didn't necessarily think convert investors were aligned with Metaplanet's, vision, and they were potentially just there for the volatility, and didn't necessarily think that converts, if he could avoid it, would make sense for their strategy. And I really just like the thought process in terms of how they're executing acquiring Bitcoin, whereas other companies are using converts, and you see what happens to the common stock when those converts get issued in terms of the short for the delta hedging. I think that if we can just avoid that for Metaplanet, I would like to, and it sounds like that's what management's thinking as well, which then again brings us back to the preferreds, which we all agree that that's kind of the next step and a really ideal product, not only for Metaplanet, but for the Japanese investor community.
Absolutely. Brian, do you have anything you want to say to this graph?
I mean, obviously this graph looks very good, but just to tag on to a point, people are talking about the convertible bonds. Yeah, if we could skip over that period, that would be great. And we've seen a few of the other smaller players get involved with convertible bonds and across their stock, and then it really bounced back. And it invites a persistent short interest to the stock that can be very challenging. So. One of the beautiful things about this is that by the time Metaplanet is actually ready to execute on the preferred stock playbook, Strategy may have already fully paved the way. So I tend to think that the preferred stock playbook is a little bit more speculative than people give it credit for. It has not been a slam dunk. It's still a work in progress. I do think people should be aware of that. But it's actually there.
Are you saying that, Brian, relative to MicroStrategy?
Yeah. I mean, based on what we've seen MicroStrategy done.
With MicroStrategy, but I do think the markets are very different, the US versus Japan. And I think that in a yield-starved market like Japan, where you have very few other preferreds, I think I've heard that there's maybe 3 to 4 other preferreds in the Japan market. And Metaplanet could be in a position to offer a much higher yield, but in doing so, they could actually spook people into thinking like, why is this one so high? What's wrong? So they may just come in right above where the other preferreds are, and be able to market them very effectively into that user base that I've been told, and you would know better, is a very conservative investor base. I think, Klein, correct me if I'm wrong, the data that you shared this weekend, there's about 13 trillion of retail investor money, half of that sitting in cash, and the Japan fund rate is less than 1%, maybe 0.5%. And so the appetite for a Bitcoin-backed yield product, I would think.
Khristina just freeze there.
I think we lost Khristina.
Well, yeah, I would just say I totally agree with the fact that I think that the preferreds will be more well received in Japan, or more quickly received in Japan, more quickly adopted in Japan with their yield environment. But on the same token, I think it's important to not to overlook the fact that the preferred market is very underdeveloped there. It's going to take them work to build it out. But once they get it going, it will suck in capital from other sectors, right? Because the competition isn't just other preferred stocks; it's the bond market. It's the Shinpei just posted some analysis the other day showing some of the top performing stocks that pay out 4% dividend. It's like, oh, look at this, 4% dividend looks pretty popular. So it'll suck in money from that. It'll suck in money from the bond market. Pretty much all the different flavors of fixed income. There's massive potential there. But then also just on the cautionary side, I think people should have expectation that it's going to take time to build that out, and it just won't all come flooding in on day one. That's basically what I want to say.
Fair.
So you mentioned, Climb, that you said you're not keen on the preferreds with the convertibility. I presume you mean something like Strike that Strategy is selling.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and go ahead.
No, I just want to say I definitely hope that that Metaplanet will offer that, and that it'll also become available in the US market, because I would warn anyone against using margin on their account. But the one thing that I'm comfortable with having on margin is Strike, which has such limited downside, and it has been moving up nicely. And then it's going to be excellent in a situation where I think we may have a blow off top, and maybe there's a bear market next year. So taking profits in some of these high MNAV companies and parking it in something like a Strike product where there's very limited downside. But if the bull market continues, at least it's 40% roughly MSTR movement in it. And I would love to have that with a Metaplanet convertibility there. So that's my thinking. And I guess also the thinking is, if it's a product that the company makes money on and there's a market demand for it, why not do it? But Climb, which I'll give you a chance to answer that potentially.
I think that it would, exactly what you said, it would be good for those of us that would like taking advantage of that product. I think that it's probably not necessary, and it's hard for me to model with the upside that you give away with that, what the total effect is. I like things that are simple. I like Accretive Revolution. The math, I'm not saying it can't get super complicated, but it's extremely simple from like just a algebra, very simple math, right? And then you look at the preferred like Stride or Strife that just offer a yield with no convert, right? Those are also very easy to think about the future effects of with Bitcoin price going up. If you sell $100 of preferreds and you offer the guy who buys the preferreds $5 a year forever, you take that $100, the dude that bought the preferreds wants $5 a year forever. He didn't want to buy $100 worth of Bitcoin, but you take that $100, you go out and buy $100 of Bitcoin. So you have this new market for Bitcoin that unlocks, which is insane for future potential. And then that $100 of Bitcoin, if Bitcoin goes to 21 million in 20-ish years, like Saylor talks about, that $100 becomes worth, that $100 worth of Bitcoin on your balance sheet becomes worth $21,000. And over the next 20 years, you pay him $5 a year, you pay out $100 on that and turn it into 21,000. And so your initial, it might have been a 5% is the way that people view that, but it ends up being less than 0.5% that you pay out over 20 years. You pay out $100 on 21 grand of net asset value. So the math is much, much easier to think through. So maybe that's just my natural avoidance of the of the convertible preferreds is just it makes things kind of awkward to think about for me. The math gets hard, and I like keeping math as simple as possible.
That's a funny argument. I like that. I'll take it.
Someone, actually Jesse, who I mentioned last week, the lawyer and is on True North, just alerted me that Dylan retweeted a post that he had made back in March of 21 that basically says, I want a rolling credit line that is collateralized with Bitcoin so rates are low, but the collateral is escrowed so you can see it as not being rehypothecated, like a credit card, but it's not unsecured, perpetual speculative attack. So he apparently just retweeted that March 21 post.
And that was Dylan retweeting it?
Yeah. Okay,
I will find it. But anyways, you said it, so we heard it. Guys, you have some thoughts on that? Nope. Let's.
One of those that you have to read a couple times and process.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would have to look at that again and think about it for a second. But it feels like we're hinting at preferred stocks. You know what I mean?
Oh, we're talking preferred like from now on. I'm not going to stop the need to talk preferred. Blake, you have a bunch you want to say about the preferred, right? And by the way, when we got started, Khristina, you were asking about, it would be interesting to find out what the total addressable market is for fixed income in Japan. But Blake, why don't we go first with you?
Yeah, I mean, just real quick on that comment, like, obviously we'll have to think about it, but that sounds like exactly what Unchained is doing. Multi-sig, you put up collateral and they give you the loan. The only thing is you'd have to have the rolling credit aspect. That's the only thing that they don't have. So, you know, those things are coming online. And as an individual, you can start to do that with Unchained. And you can see the Bitcoin being in multi-sig versus with other companies where it can be rehypothecated. And then, on the preferred, I guess the thought is, why it seems to, how we kind of stack rank these different instruments, the convertible Bitcoin convertible bond versus the preferred. There's a question of scaling and traction that Brian mentioned, and it's interesting to think through that. But, I think it's definitely the highest torque, as Saylor has mentioned, but also I think it's not discussed enough that it's also, if the supply, as I mentioned before, if the equity dries up or there's no more equity issuance, the stock will go parabolic and the yield will still be high. And so you can imagine that kind of dynamic happening, and what kind of game theory or I don't want to say market chaos, but like you can imagine that the stock just, increasing 10% a day for an extended period of time, starting to climb to be the NVIDIA. Just like NVIDIA kind of came out of nowhere, MicroStrategy and Metaplanet are going to do the exact same thing. So it's interesting to think about the value that it can add and how.
Guys,
good.
Yeah, I would throw us in some different perspective. It's a very interesting idea that they could just not do any more common equity issuance and just ramp up preferreds. But honestly, I'm a little bit skeptical of that. If we've looked at the way Strategy has rolled out their preferred stocks, I think part of the reason they hit the ATM as hard as they did was to build up a big equity base to issue those against. Because if you're going out to the market and you're selling preferred stock and you've got, say, it's weird to call it a leverage ratio because it's not strictly debt. It's preferred stocks or equity. But let's say that you want a 6x coverage ratio on that or whatever it is. If you get to a point where you've sold enough preferreds that you've exceeded your ratio, well, you've got to go out and sell some more equity to build that back up. If Bitcoin grows in the background, if the value of the Bitcoin itself grows, then that is can take care of itself to a certain degree. But I just, it's hard for me to think that they would just go like preferred only and never issue any more equity, and that could work out mathematically. I think there's always going to have to be some equity sales, yes. Even if it's not to cover the dividends, just to keep the BTC coverage ratio in line to keep, those fixed income investors happy?
It's more of a thought experiment of like what that allows you to do. I guess is kind of how I was thinking through it. And then as Brad, you mentioned, like there is that challenge of actually doing it. Like, can they do it? Why hasn't it been done? Which are
So
go ahead.
I guess my thinking on that is, you reach as soon as you're at MNAV 3 or above, it's super accretive to issue new stock. And Metaplanet is at 5.2, which is really nice and attractive. And if it runs to like 8, 10, it's been at 22, I think, at the height last year. It's just so advantageous to issue stock that I guess that's what they'll do. But yeah, interesting thought experiment. Khristina, do you have something, some thoughts on that?
Sorry, my whole thing kind of just froze there for a minute, so I missed a little bit of what you guys were talking about.
No problem. Climb, what about you? Do you want to chime in?
So yeah, I think 100% I agree, Brian. Like as long as MNAV is still strong, not just a little bit over 1, but if it's 3 or above, let's say, it's a no-brainer to sell common shares. It's really, for me, I just use it as a thought experiment, and I'm not completely ruling it out, but I don't know enough about the Japanese. Like I don't know about the leverage ratios or whatever they would call them. It looks like the stuff that Jesse sent out earlier, he was talking about that if Japanese companies issue preferreds, they have to like prove that they have enough income to pay for it. If I'm reading, I just was trying to read it real quick, but if so, then they can basically just roll some of their preferred sales into their income strategy to more than cover it, right? So they could roll 10 or 20% of their preferred sales into their income strategy, totally cover the preferred payment, roughly, that would be the rough ratio, let's say, and then use the rest to purchase Bitcoin, the vast majority to purchase Bitcoin, which then also increases their net asset value. So it is possibly a pointless exercise to think 100% if they could accomplish it with no common share issuance ever. And yeah, you're right. Like, and it wouldn't make sense for them to, because if you can get Bitcoin per share in more than one way, from preferred issuance and common issuance, like you'd want to pull as many levers as you can. And during a bear market, you may just pull the preferred lever and not so much the the ATM like stuff on the common shares.
Sure. And would like to jump right in. One key difference, that if they actually have a larger income stream to service the dividends with, that potentially that lets them carry a larger leverage ratio. Because one of the things about strategy is that if they're actually able to scale their program, they've got no way to pay for it other than ATM on the common. So that differentiator right there could mean that they just have to carry less of a BTC coverage ratio on the preferreds they have outstanding. I mean, that's another possible outcome.
One of the unique things that I didn't realize until this last week that is unique, another unique point to Metaplanet, is that Metaplanet's been using this options income strategy to acquire more Bitcoin. And apparently that is a unique advantage that they may have in Japan, to the extent that if MicroStrategy or other companies in the US were to do it, they would be classified differently under the SEC. And so Sid Surrey was someone who posted in detail about it. But I think the options income strategy is another differentiator in terms of income for Metaplanet specifically.
That is really interesting, Khristina, because I actually have put that down as one of the points here that we potentially could talk about. Is Metaplanet is making money selling put options on Bitcoin and buying more Bitcoin and generating a bigger yield because of that. And I wonder, like, why are the others not doing it? Why is strategy not doing that? But legal differences, it seems to explain it. Thank you so much for that. So that's another advantage, another great setup really for Metaplanet there in Japan. I just want to add to, because we've been talking about preferreds, that and I want to hear your opinion, Climb, that I think we may not have said it, but we've all spoken about that there's a shareholder meeting in September, and I believe, Climb, that you think that that could be the voting for allowing preferreds, which then would allow them to start selling Strike, and Strife-like products in Japan, which we expect a lot from. I don't know how long time that would take to come to market, but Climb, is that your expectation that the meeting could be about voting for that?
Yeah, and the more I think about it, the more it seems to make sense. And also the more just looking at Simon, Dylan, and Shinpei's posts about it, and you even have Sailor in Prague. You know, we've shared the clip of that before, but saying that he called Simon up a while back and said, like, you're going to beat me to the game of issuing preferreds in Japan. So that's pretty suggestive, obviously. Now, you know, and some people say, well, they might want more assets before they issue them, and that's true, but I don't know that having a vote on it ties them to releasing it, you know, the next day or anything. Like, so they could potentially vote on it, then the red tape is cut through, then they just release the product whenever is best for them. So I see no disadvantage, and you know, unless there's some reason they couldn't vote in September, but it seems like that the board first approving it and then the shareholder vote seems to be the general consensus of maybe how it would go. You know, and then just get the final approval. But from what I understand, the Japanese market is pretty much like, you know, if the shareholders agree to something, then okay, you know, just go ahead and do it. I mean, that's why Metaplanet exists in the first place. You know, they gave them some pushback about the Bitcoin strategy at first. Dylan has talked about that quite a bit in some older interviews. But once Metaplanet was able to show, like, no, like, all of our shareholders want this, like, it's pretty unanimous. You know, not just the board agrees, but the shareholders really want this. Then the regulators were like, okay, well, cool, just keep doing what you're doing then.
No, I think that, thank you for that, Climb, and I completely agree. And we've also learned from strategy that you don't just offer a new, totally different fixed income product in the market, and then it's there's a $50 billion demand for it. It's taken time, and it's still relatively slow ATMs on Strike, and Strife from strategy in US. So it's going to take time. So I don't think the fact that they right now have 13,000 Bitcoin, by that time they might have 40 or 50, right? We can ask you about that, Climb. So they'll have more than enough, I believe, to get these preferred stocks operating, and it'll take time to build up. So, like, let's just go, as they say, right, in Japan, 555. What do you guys think?
They don't need to issue as much at the beginning. Let's say they did $1 billion IPO for a preferred stock that, you know, 2 weeks ago, that would have doubled their stack. they don't need to be that big for it to still make a material impact on the business. But yeah, I think it looks very interesting. They could not be telegraphing harder that this is what they're interested in doing. And I think it's really, like, just from a marketing strategy standpoint, I love it, because they couldn't be doing it any better. Especially when I saw that Shinpei post the other day saying, look at these dividend yielding stocks. Looks like 4% is very popular. I think I would take that very much at face value, that's very much what they're thinking about right now.
Imagine Japanese investors that are used to the carry trade, that don't have to go to the US for the other end of that, right? They could, I mean, now who knows what the margin requirements would be on a product like this, but, you know, in theory, they could margin borrow yen at 0.5% or whatever they have to pay, maybe 1% or something, I'm not sure, and double down on these preferreds. So what, you know, I'm not sure again about margin on these products, but, you know, even if they didn't use margin, the concept is still there. They take their, you know, a portion of that 6 trillion that the Japanese retail investors have that's in cash right now, that's earning probably nothing or close to nothing, and put it in something that's, you know, that will be seen as less risky the longer the product stays around. And we're seeing that now with Strategy's products. The bump they got the other day after the first yield payout, you know, to me, that's not a coincidence. The first yield payout happens, and then, now everyone's like, oh yeah, these things work. So they're in.
Nice. Did you guys, by the way, see that from today? I think Simon tweeted out this morning. or was it yesterday, that from today, July 1st, margin is now possible on Metaplanet in Japan. But
I saw that.
that could be wild, but also, of course, comes with danger and maybe unnecessary when you're holding a space rocket like Metaplanet. But definitely it'll create volatility, and that's vitality, and can be sold, right?
Yeah, well, to add some more context to that, this it's kind of like a hockey penalty box for stocks with high volatility. And Metaplanet's been in and out of that box a few times, but now they're back out. It's game on.
Oh, it has been. They have been had a margin ability before.
Yeah, it was. Yeah, it was.
Oh.
I don't know exactly when it was taken away, but the Japanese commenters I've seen saying it's been in and out a few times. That it will probably be back, back on the restricted list again before long. But for now, it's out, and people can margin up.
Yeah. Well. Okay. Well, that will be interesting to see how that plays out. Anyone else has any thoughts on that?
That's sort of funny because it almost implies that regulators want the stock to go up or down at certain times. I'm not saying that, but like if you wanted it to, you could literally draw retail investors in to margin a product and then just determine the day in the future that you're going to take that margin away, and that's going to create selling pressure because people have to get out of their margin. So I mean that's just kind of awkward. I sort of wish that part was more stable, but it certainly adds to volatility and keeps things interesting, I guess, keeps investors on their toes.
Well, I guess another way to think about it, and if I'm thinking about this correctly, is that the Metaplanet stock that you own, you can draw on that to purchase other securities. So it doesn't necessarily mean that you're buying, that you would, I could be thinking about this wrong, but I think maybe it would just give you more borrowing power to potentially buy other stocks.
I think you're right, Khristina, but I also think that people will end up using the margin for just buying more Metaplanet. But I mean, if you have the access to it, some degens are gonna degen, and no crying in the casino, but stay safe out there and everything. So these really nice purchases lately from Metaplanet, and we spoke about it earlier on. It does look like acceleration. Have your guys changed what you're thinking about as targets for the year? I think just last week with Climb, someone asking about it in the chat what the targets are, and last week we went through Climb's different bull and base case and bear case scenarios. Any of you here on the screen changed any thoughts about where you see the stock go at the end of the year?
It's a flywheel. I wake up, I read about Metaplanet, I get bullish, and repeat. I would not be surprised if targets revised upwards.
That's my hope too. And like I've said before, I try to keep my models conservative for the most part, but obviously I have some fun with them too. And even so, I'm not 100% in Metaplanet. It's my only equity position, but I do have enough cash to make sure I'm safe. So stay safe out there. Even with my level of conviction, which couldn't go any higher, I still want to make sure that I'm safe no matter what. And I apply the same logic to Bitcoin in general. Mm-hmm. But yeah, it's hard for me to imagine them having less than 60,000 Bitcoin at the end of the year. That would be a pretty bearish case to me. Even if they issued the whole 555 at their current price around, let's just round it down to $10, that would equate to almost 50,000 Bitcoin on top of what they, baked into what they have essentially, putting them around 60. So I like that there's no options on this product too. My models would even be more conservative if there were, because I want to discourage people from buying far out of the money options and just gambling on it, because the worst thing you can do, in my opinion, with a sure bet is to gamble on it being an insane outcome. So if you already have a sure bet, you don't need to go in very heavy. If we're all sitting here in 6 months hugely disappointed because we're at $25, that's awesome. And so that's, like nobody lost money on that. There's no options. If I say it's going to 50 to 100, or that's what I think, which is what I've said before, by kind of end of the year time frame, then you have some people go out and buy $90 or even $100 call options if those were available, and they're not, but then they end up just totally missing it, or flipping it in a couple of weeks and feeling like they're invincible, and then risking it all on another play and losing it all. And I've done that before. So don't mess up. I'm not saying this is a sure bet, but this is to me, a high probability thing. That's just how I view it personally. And so I just want to not mess it up.
Agreed. And I'd love to hear how the group's portfolio allocation models are, how they think through portfolio allocation, especially Khristina and Climb. Climb, since you're heavy, it's the only equity that you have. I've tried to use the Kelly criterion. I don't know if you've used that before, but it's like a betting probability, risk, reward type model. And it really, I did it with Bitcoin, but I'm doing it with my Metaplanet as well. And it just is like, yeah, it pretty much says what you want to do, that Climb is kind of doing, which is it's the only equity that he has. It's like kind of an all-in model, just because the upside opportunity is so high and the risk is so low. Even in the bearish models that Climb is putting out, right? Those, if you even use the most bearish models and try to weight it, it's still suggesting that you should do that, because we're talking about a 400% return Bitcoin yield on top of an asset that's growing 30 to 60% a year. Like it's incredibly bullish, and this is like a once in a lifetime or once in a species kind of opportunity. So I'd love to just get anyone's thoughts, riff on that maybe a little bit. If anyone's got any thoughts.
Kelly criterion, yeah, it's super interesting. It gets pretty deep, and I didn't know like that term actually until maybe 6 months, 8 or 9 months ago, I guess. But it's been always somewhat intuitive, but it's nice to have. It's interesting because it gives you an objective structure, like kind of a simple mathematical way to optimize bet sizing based on the probability that you assign, which awkwardly that's subjective unless you're doing something like a coin flip or a roulette table. So that's the awkward part, is sort of trying to take your conviction, take your knowledge, compare it to other stuff, and say, okay, what are my honest thoughts about the probability that this thing does a 5x or that this stock does a 10x in this time frame. There's no theta decay, no time decay. So it's just letting it play out. And for me, that results in maybe a 75-25 or an 85-20 sort of allocation. But everyone's going to arrive at different sort of assumptions with the probability part of that payout.
Right.
Khristina?
So I've not even heard of that portfolio allocation strategy, so I'm going to have to definitely look into it. For me right now, Metaplanet, and I was just pulling up my account on my phone, there's no scientific approach to it, but I have about 40% of Metaplanet in one account. And this will vary, between 35, 30, 40%, not because I'm selling the shares, just because of price movement of other positions and adding other positions. But it's a pretty large weighting for me across my entire portfolio. And what I found myself doing is going through what used to be a very diversified portfolio of, call it 30 or 40 stocks, and continuing to move into much more concentrated positions that I do think can, 10x. So Metaplanet being the one that I have the highest conviction in. Bitcoin obviously gets its own separate allocation. I do still own MicroStrategy shares and Leaps, but then I also own some non-Bitcoin related, non-Bitcoin equities. I have a very large position in a satellite company because I think that particular company also has the opportunity to 10x as they bring broadband satellite connection to your everyday cell phone globally. And so, yes, I love Bitcoin. Yes, I love Metaplanet, but I do hold other positions.
What about you, Brian?
Yeah, I don't want to say too specifically what I hold, but
yeah,
there just more broadly, the way I think about it is there are positions I feel like I can sleep on at night with no problem, and there are positions that I can't do that with. And the former I have larger positions in, and the latter I have smaller positions in.
Right. So speaking for myself, Blake, to answer your question, um, since I came across Bitcoin, I went all in, and that was the only thing I had because I had such a high conviction, and I couldn't find anything that I could feel so safe and secure about, and nothing would match the return. So I was only Bitcoin, all in on Bitcoin until well, in 21, I started putting family members that I deemed there is going to be a challenge with private keys, start putting them in MicroStrategy. And I said, whenever there's an ETF, this is going to be better than an ETF because they have a negative compound interest. Strategy occasionally buys more Bitcoin, so they have a compound positive interest. And that's really key if you want to, you go the up and not down. Um, Little did I know that that strategy absolutely crushed it last year and really developed the playbook. So that brought me to strategy as well, investing. And because I'm in it for a good return. So the only reason that I started investing in strategy was, well, it significantly outperforms Bitcoin. And that's the only reason that I'm open to it. Last year, Bitcoin did 2.5x and strategy did 6.5x, and now there's some new companies that are also doing really well in their local markets. Especially Metaplanet is killing it with a track record and so many things that are just phenomenal in Japan for this setup. So super bullish. But what I like to do, Blake, is that I have for the size of my portfolio, Metaplanet is a big part, and then there's strategy, which is split on the common stock, some derivatives, so leveraged, and strike, which is strictly on margin because otherwise I wouldn't bother owning it. It's except from yesterday where it outperformed MSTR and MSTU both. It's generally supposed to be not so exciting. It was. That's great. And then I have small exposure to SWC and just a tiny exposure to H100. So what I like to do is keep track on the MNAV, so the pricing of these stocks, and then might do small movements between it. It's not like I'm day trading or anything, but I only want to own things that I do believe can significantly outperform Bitcoin. And if something looks overpriced, or this is a little bit getting steep, but then say Metaplanet all of a sudden is only MNAV 5 when the others are 12, well, then I'm moving over. That's how I'm thinking of it. What about yourself, Blake?
Yeah, similar frameworks, but it is thinking about the risk and quantifying that, as Climate suggested, it's subjective. So you're like, well, it's too risky. Okay, well, what's the probability that you lose your Metaplanet stock or something like that? Like, what's the risk there? What is the risk? And really quantifying that. What's the probability of something bad happening to Metaplanet or Bitcoin, for that example? And the beautiful thing about Bitcoin is that not everyone, a lot of the Bitcoiners got into it because it was too risky to keep their money in fiat currencies. It was too risky to keep their money in the bank. It was too risky to store fiat under their mattress, which are the typical safe bets, right? Money under the mattress, gold bars in the backyard, money in the bank. Those are the analogies of safety and security. But that's why you doing this exercise and being like, no, this is the safest investment and it has the highest upside. Therefore, the portfolio allocation needs to be higher. And I think it's a similar asymmetric opportunity with Metaplanet, especially looking at the forward, 5 years of predictable money coming in, the preferred stock, the equities, and then running that model. Okay, there's a 1% chance, but a 100x upside on top of my Bitcoin upside. You do that math, and it's just a framework for people to come up with, like, okay, like, what is the real risk? You can use the same thing with Bitcoin or Metaplanet. What is the real risk? A 1% chance that for some reason it goes to zero, which I don't even see how that could possibly happen. Like, maybe the Japanese government comes in and takes it, that, I guess. But other than that, it doesn't seem. And then there's just a little bit more of like the hurdle rate or the best opportunity cost of capital. Will it like underperform MicroStrategy or Bitcoin or whatever? And then you get into that a little bit. But that's kind of how I think about it. But the risk is kind of the key aspect, I think, put into the Kelly criterion, or just kind of do a basic risk model of like downside, upside, probability, and that's why I'm just so bullish on Metaplanet, because it just the rate of return that they're getting is 300-400-500% annualized a year, and I'm just going like, this is too good to be true. This is insane. This can't be true. But we know the mechanics of it. We get it. It makes complete sense when you think about it, and there doesn't seem to be any real holes in our logic. We're just early, I guess. So
like the criteria, is it KELLY, Kelly criteria?
Yeah, and then CRIETION. And it's
Kelly criterion. Okay.
Yeah. And so it's like used most obviously when you're using betting or poker, where like mathematically, what are the probabilities of this being the best hand on the table? How many more hands am I going to get? How much of my stack do I put into this? And that gives you an understanding. And I think one of the other things that I wasn't going to get into, but the amount of opportunities that we're going to see that have this asymmetric opportunity in our lifetime, I don't think we're going to get anything as close to any of these Bitcoin or Metaplanet, in our bloodlines history. Our great grandkids are going to be like, that was the best investment opportunity in the history of investment opportunities. And it's just like, all right, well,
this is it.
Hope is not a strategy, but I really hope so.
Yeah, right, exactly.
This is absolutely it. And as Emperor Lightyear said earlier, don't F this up. I completely agree. And for that reason, I just want to strongly warn against usage of margin and everything. I don't think it's needed. Bitcoin itself is going to go from $100,000 to $50 million in our lifetime, I believe. On top of that, you have something that moves faster than that, and it's going to do a bigger return because they are able to accumulate more Bitcoin on the balance sheet. The opportunity is enormous. Don't F it up. Like, don't blow your accounts, and then your whole bloodline is going to pay the price. Don't do that. I will add to what you said before, Blake, that I actually feel I sleep better at night now, knowing that it's not only cold storage, multi-sig, geographically dispersed Bitcoin, because there's still like everything was one thing, right? I'm happy now to have some stocks here, there, and so if one thing for some reason I can't foresee messes up, I don't have only one thing, and that makes me feel better, and also it sleeps better, and it does give a better return than Bitcoin. That's why I'm here.
How are you sleeping well at night? I just don't sleep, and it's not because I have too much risk on. I have a lot of conviction in my positions, but I'm like so excited that I'm like dialing into Japan trading hours on the dojo, and then I'm waking up and checking, and then Japan gets going, and then I'm like, oh, I'm like around the clock trying to digest everything. And then when I do get some sleep and I wake up, I feel like I've missed so much and I can't catch up.
I think you're exactly like Climb. We spoke about it. I can't remember if after we went live or if it was in the green room, but how he's awake many of the hours of the day.
Yeah, well, when I wake up, I see Climb's like posted all these new charts and tweets and this, and like he must be the night owl that's working over throughout the night, and then I have to catch up on everything that I missed.
There you go. So the crazy thing is, I feel like we could continue. It's awesome. You guys are great. I'm learning a lot, and the chat is appreciating it. All the viewers in general. But actually, so I'm trying to pump out a lot of content because this is not all I think about, but I'm very zoned in on this now for these last couple of months, especially weeks. But in 13 minutes, I will have Tim Kotzman on my YouTube channel, and we're going to talk about his digital Bitcoin treasuries conference. So that gives me an opportunity to be respectful of you guys' times as well, because I actually have to go live in 13 minutes. So I hope you're okay with that.
Thank you for all you do. You work around the clock too. I wake up in the morning and I see another thing with a different CEO and another podcast there, and I don't know how you do it.
I mean, I sleep. I usually sleep at night, and then I get up and I have coffee and I sit in front of the computer and I start this stuff. Yeah, but you're right. Yesterday was the CEO of H100. Tomorrow is the CEO of SWC, Smarter Web Company. And on Thursday is Alexander from the CEO of Blockchain Group. So, but I love this, and that is all important for my decision making and overall, and happily sharing that with everyone else so they can use the bits and parts that they like or whatever. And then I share it with people that I learned from. So that's awesome. Which is going to make it tough that next week I'll be in a summer house, so there won't be a because there's people I should give my heart and attention to. So I won't be able to do a Metaplanet roundtable next week. So if you guys hopefully are down again 2 weeks from now, but why don't we take a last round if anyone wants to add whatever you want to say to what we've discussed, or final words or something like that.
But, well, Anders, just the comment you made earlier that you're happy to have more distributed around than potentially just cold storage somewhere. And one of the always big fears people talk about is, what if the government confiscates it? What if it's not a total confiscation? What if it's a 20% haircut, but the thing you bought did a 5x versus the other thing you could have had? Yeah, it's a what if. I like what ifs. But anyway, very bullish on Metaplanet. That's all I got to say for now.
I just want to thank you all, not only for being here, but the hats, the 4 hats. And we all know that Climb is wearing one, but he's not on camera. So we got to get it also on your avatar there, Climb. But go on, who next want to say some final words?
I'll follow Brian. Very bullish on. Oh, Climb, please go ahead.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, obviously everyone knows my position on Metaplanet. Thanks for hosting these every weekenders. And yeah, I can't wait to see how things go. And every time there's another buy announcement, I'll try to have charts at the ready. And if there's ever anything that people want charted, just reach out to me and I'll see if it's something I'm able to do.
Awesome, yeah, Climb. And go ahead, Blake. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you again, Anders. Really appreciate this. And I think what we're seeing here is hyper Bitcoinization happening through Metaplanet. So I'm obviously incredibly bullish. So again, appreciate all the work, and we'll see you in 2 weeks.
Yeah. Love that. I like that. Metaplanet, hyper Bitcoinization is happening through Metaplanet. But that's exactly what these Bitcoin accumulating companies are. And that's why I'm a little bit laughing or smirking when the purists that think it's such a bad thing that companies are buying Bitcoin. We're going to have a future, hopefully, with companies. And if you want a future with companies where you don't have to build your own car, you don't have to grow your own food, you don't have to make your own clothes, well, then we need companies. And don't you want those companies to buy Bitcoin? Come on, how hard is it? This is a good thing. It's good for Bitcoin. It's good for humanity. You guys in agreement with that, or am I mean, we're all loving this space, right? The backs.
Yeah, if hyper Bitcoinization is a thing that happens, the last stages of fiat are going to be borrowing to buy Bitcoin. That's what's happening here.
That is such a strong end note right there. And I should go get ready for Tim Kotzman. So he'll be on in 9 minutes. Thank you all, Khristina, Climb, Brian, Blake. Thank you for having this discussion with me and sharing your knowledge with so many people. 5,100 live viewers right now. Thank you everyone for watching. Without you guys, we probably wouldn't be doing this. Let's be honest. It's a thrill to be able to interact also with the chat and everything, and know that people care about what we do. It's motivating. So thank you everyone for watching, and thank you guys here on screen. And I look forward to do some more roundtables with you on the other side of the summer house. All right, bye for now.